Hi everyone, I'm Ava and I'm an American living in the Netherlands, and today I wanted to talk to you about something that Dutch people and Americans, at least in my experience, seem to have a completely different definition and idea about. I don't think you would even guess what it is, and maybe you've never even stopped to think about this before. But today I want to talk about personal space. So if this isn't your first time watching one of my videos, you might know that I moved to the Netherlands a little over 2 years ago to be with my Dutch girlfriend. She's Dutch, I moved for love, and in the 2 years that I've been here, I've sort of picked up and I've been noticing differences between American culture and Dutch culture. And I like to talk about them and share these experiences of mine in these videos that I make. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about something that I kind of have noticed, I've been thinking about, and I didn't know what label to put it under. And then I thought maybe it has to do with the idea of personal space. Okay, so I feel like very generally, very broadly speaking, Americans are very respective of each other's personal space. So you have your personal space and I respect that. I have my personal space. I feel like in the Netherlands, the concept of personal space didn't quite transfer. I feel like Dutch people think there's space, which we don't have. So people are always fighting for space. And then personal space, like what is that? I don't even know. So this has been the summary of my experiences in the last 2 years. And the first example that I want to talk to you about when I talk about personal space is more literal. So I'm going to be talking about personal space as a literal thing, like actually like this is my space. And then I also want to talk about personal space figuratively, so very loosely. And this literal example that I want to talk about is that Americans will not, for instance, touch you randomly because my personal space is also my body and my possessions. Whereas Dutch people are not afraid, I've noticed, to touch you when they're talking to you or when they're trying to say something. Now, it can be very nice, but this was something that I noticed right away because for instance, one time I was on the street walking, and this is when the first Corona pandemic lockdown had happened in the Netherlands, and we were all really afraid of getting COVID from doorknobs or whatever. So the idea of touching someone during that time that wasn't your partner, was a big step. So I was walking on the street one time and I distinctly remember that someone bumped into me, and I was already like, oh, you're bumping into me, and everyone is frustrated when you bump into someone. That is not news. But then this person simply touches my shoulder and says, sorry, whore. And I was like, okay, I was surprised by the whore part at this point, but they were, they touched my shoulder and I felt furious. I was infuriated because first of all, in the US, we don't go around touching people. Again, blanket statement, but to me, that was like, what? And then second, I was like, this is also the pandemic. This person was just trying to be very nice. And I think this is their way of being personable, like that person's way at least. But because it did stand out to me, I was extremely confused. And I was walking with my girlfriend and I was like, what just happened? This guy just touched me on the street. And she assured me that it was normal and he was very nice and she thought I was overreacting and she told me to tone it down a notch. But once I noticed this happen to me, I also noticed this happen elsewhere. For instance, I watched one of those press conferences for COVID, or maybe it was just a news item, I don't know. But I noticed that Hugo de Jonge and Mark Rutte were having a conversation. And I think they accidentally touched each other or something. And then Mark Rutte was like, oh, sorry. And then he put his arm again on Hugo de Jonge's shoulder. And that made me think, this is exactly what happened to me. Like, Mark Rutte should not have been touching Hugo de Jonge, but he did, and then he apologized by touching him again. And it was hilarious. You might have seen this clip going around. But it happened to me, and I'm thinking, I guess this is just something that's different between the US and the Netherlands. So if you are Dutch and you go to America, don't go around touching people. Yeah, Americans will not like that. And by the way, my girlfriend does this too. She does a lot of Dutch things and a lot of non-Dutch things. This is one thing that I've seen her do over and over. She's very much a toucher when it comes to, apologizing or being close to you. It's all about that touchy-feely. So it's not just people who I don't know doing this. It's also people very close to me I've seen do this over and over again. Now, the next example I want to share with you that illustrates a different idea of personal space is also quite literal, and it has to do with when you go grocery shopping or when you're out and about just conducting business in public spaces. So I have noticed that when I go shopping in the Netherlands, let's say I go to the Lapjesmarkt where you can buy fabric, or let's just say I'm at a grocery store. Maybe I'm looking at some fruits. Let's say I've decided that, 2022 is going to be the year that I incorporate more fruits into my diet instead of all that Dutch cheese I've been eating. So, I'm standing there taking a look at some apples, and then, let's say there's a Dutch person standing next to me. They also want to get to the apple. So instead of saying, excuse me, you're taking too long, can I go look at the damn apples that you're looking at? They'll slowly eye you. And if you're not paying attention, because I'm so interested in these apples, they'll slowly creep over a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And you're here doing your apple thing. They're trying to do their apple thing. And then slowly they will come in front of you. You won't even see it happening. They'll creep up, creep up, creep up until they're close enough, and then they'll just grab the apple, or they'll just do something next to you. In the US, that would be so rude. Someone would, if I were in the US, it would be completely acceptable for me in that situation to turn around to the person and say, excuse me, do you mind? Because it's my personal space. But of course, I want to acknowledge that I know that they are not being rude. Or maybe it is rude. What do you think? If you are Dutch, let me know. But to me, I think if you have different cultural norms and you're just abiding by them, that's fine. But as an American, we have different cultural norms. So now the same situation in the US, if I were in Whole Foods, I don't know, just name an American supermarket, and I was standing there looking at the damn apples again, and then there's an American who wants to look at those apples, they'll just stand there and say nothing, and they'll just look at you with a smile like that, very obviously trying to as far away from you as possible, stay there and then try and get your attention, but awkwardly. So it's all very awkward because Americans tend to be passive aggressive and non-confrontational. Not always, because in this situation, I would also expect an American to just simply say, hey, I want to grab some apples, do you mind? And then they would do it, but they wouldn't creep in front of you, because then I think anyone would just flip in the US. It's really not something you should do. And I have two other similar examples to illustrate this point. So if you are, for instance, on an escalator in the Netherlands, and you're standing there, you will have another Dutch person or another person standing right next to you, as close as possible they can get. COVID or not, they don't care. They're standing right there and they're breathing down your neck. And it's just, it's just what it is here. That is the norm. People don't expect you to leave a lot of space because that would be rude to everyone who's trying to hurry. So, but then that means that they stand very close to you. And again, COVID or not, I feel like this isn't my space on the escalator, and but it's just different here. In the US, you can expect that people will leave a little bit of space so that they're not very close to you, that you can feel their breath on your body, on your very person. And also Americans like to just go on the left-hand side and the left-hand side and just pass you. And while that is also a thing in the Netherlands, I feel like people often stand next to each other as well. So that's not working. So if you are in the Netherlands, or if you've just moved to the Netherlands, welcome. It's a great country. I'm having a blast here. Lots of good stuff. Not so great people breathing down your neck when you're on an escalator. And I do think this also ties into Dutch people being a little more impatient because they just want to keep going. And another example of that is when you're waiting for traffic lights. So if I am on my bike and let's say I'm with my girlfriend and we're waiting at a traffic light on our bikes, and if there's literally 30 centimeters of distance between us, because we even in our relationship, we like to have our personal space, because what is a relationship even without a little bit of personal space? So anyway, we're standing there with our bikes, and then be sure if we left that much space, someone will stand in between us with their bikes. You're waiting at a stoplight with other Dutch people on bikes, on foot, you will all crowd up because that's just what people are like. They just want to make sure that they can get as close as possible to moving forward. In contrast, bikers in America will be standing in a line like that, like a one file line. They will not be crowding up quite the same way. Moving on, another thing that I've noticed that I quickly want to mention is that I don't see this happen all the time, but oftentimes, sometimes at least, I notice that Dutch people will stand quite close to you when they talk to you because that's very nice, that's inviting, good body language, etc. But then in contrast, I've noticed that in the US, that distance between two people trying to have a conversation tends to be a bit larger. So I wouldn't stand right here next to someone in the US while having a conversation. But here in the Netherlands, I feel like even in a situation where someone is not very flirty and they're just talking to you very normally, they might stand quite close to you because that's personal. And in the US, I think I've generally noticed that people tend to keep a little bit of distance in conversations. That is a quick thing I want to drop in here. Okay, so I've shared a couple of literal examples with you, or physical examples with you, and I want to talk a little bit about the metaphorical, figurative examples of personal space that you can, interpret in this way. Now, one of those examples is if something happens on the street. I have noticed this without fail because I live in busy parts of town, like in the Netherlands. I've moved a couple of times, but each time I've lived in a busy part of town or a city. But cities are small though. But anyway, in a busy part of town, and then someone on the street, let's say, does something, like maybe they say something, or maybe there's a ruckus, someone's gotten into a fight, and without fail, every single Dutch person who lives on that street or who's there will pop out of their windows and, pull open their curtains if they're doing the whole curtain thing, because, most Dutch people don't even bother, but they open up their curtains and then they will sit there at their window for their prime seat to watch the show. It's really funny because in the US, people, I think, also would let that play out. Maybe they would keep distance, maybe they don't care, I don't know. But I have not noticed so many people put so much focus into an incident that is happening out on the street. And when I say everyone comes out of their windows to look, I mean as far as I can see on the street that I'm living on. I always see people just popping their heads out or literally sitting on the windowsill so that they can have a good look at what's happening. Let me tell you, I find that so interesting because I cannot, to give a relatable example, like I'm from New York City and I cannot tell you the number of times I've cried or, got into a fight in public, cried on the New York City subway, yelling at someone on the New York City subway, and no one cares. No one is looking at you. Dutch people would have all eyes on you. You absolutely cannot do that without drawing attention to yourself. So yeah, the first time someone had an argument, like a loud argument on my street and everyone popped out, I had a great time. Not only did I get to see that fight, because of course I wasn't gonna sit back while everyone else got to enjoy the show, but I also got to enjoy other people watching the show. It was really funny. And you might have noticed in this example that I mentioned if Dutch people are doing the whole curtain thing, or if they're even opening up their curtains to begin with, because Dutch people don't do curtains. I think this is also a great example of personal space. In the US, people really like to shut their curtains, and everything that happens behind those curtains is very private. It's their private life. Now, I will say that this stereotype of Dutch people not having curtains, it's true, but it's not as true as you would expect, especially in really busy parts of the city. People will have curtains, but not as often as you would expect. And I think people are very happy just with not hiding what happens behind their closed doors as much, because even people who live on the ground floor, you can sometimes just look and see what they're doing. I could tell you the details of their lives because they're huge windows here and you can just look right in. Now I know you're not supposed to, but can you blame me? Of course I want to look. It looks really inviting as well. Like Dutch people have these gezellige households, so you definitely want to take a sneak peek. But anyway, try not to, and it's just that Dutch people don't care. They are very open about that, more so than Americans would be. In the US, it would be really weird if many people in the city just had their curtains open going about their daily lives, especially if they lived on the ground floor or a floor where you could just look into their apartment or house. So those are some of the examples that I wanted to share with you today that I think illustrate that Dutch culture and American culture can also differ along the lines of personal space, or at least something that resembles this idea of personal space and privacy. I'm curious from your experiences, what have you experienced? What is it like where you're from? As always, I'm excited to read about that in the comments down below. And until next time,